I want to talk about something of which I am no expert. I'm only presenting my experience as encouragement, not shaming, blaming, or should, or creating any sort of outline for another, so-called another. So, big T trauma, including narcissistic abuse, losing all of our money or a significant chunk of it, or whatever it is, but having a really strong sense that the safety of this life is wrapped up in continuing to think, can create a really sort of thick web of suffering that it can feel impossible to get out of. And as long as it seems that the mind is keeping us alive, or the mind is keeping us safe, it can be really difficult to listen from the heart, to hear a new teacher talking and not want to just find fault in them. And this could be as simple as not wanting to listen to a male teacher because of experiences in dating. You know, the mind makes these associations that, as long as they're unconscious, so they're beneath the radar of attention, they will rule the reactions of the experience, in the experience. I'm speaking about this because a year and a half ago, there was great suffering, and there was so much effort in trying to supposedly liberate myself from this suffering or from the circumstances of life. And so spiritual seeking, which is what it was at the time, was coming from a very sort of selfish place. And I'm not saying this to shame myself or, this Heather experience. It is what it is. It's in terms of the karma of the Heather story, these various things happened that led to this point, and Heather responded and reacted in exactly the ways one would expect. And that is the karma of the situation. Being asleep to who I really am meant that the character was playing out unconsciousness. It was simply responding to the input in life, and it was just putting out exactly what it was getting. So of course, when approaching spiritual seeking, this was done from a place of kind of direness, a sense of great urgency, of this needs to make me happier now. Almost as though survival depended on it. And there's a positive aspect to this, which was that there was a very strong will involved in wanting to liberate the self. But there was so much that was missed, because in every effort, there was an outcome expected. There was a given. There was this preconceived idea that whatever it is I was looking for definitely wasn't here, because what's here has not been working. Again, this idea that everything I need to know is contained within me seemed absurd. That was one of those lessons that I just pushed off for another day. The mind kind of thought, there must be value in this, and I've seen this repeated multiple times, so I'll worry about that another time. Right now, I can't take that in. And so this so-called journey took more and more time because the mind was not willing to relinquish its kind of territory. It seemed as a matter of survival that it carry on exactly as it has been. And of course, if that is my stance, life is going to teach me that that is incorrect. And so the various things the mind kept trying, which were completely devoid of any inspiration, intuition, higher intelligence, were only perpetuating more of what the same mind had been trying to avoid. So having fear-based thoughts coming up all the time, the ideas that are going to occur to the mind are going to be based in avoiding fear, based in trying to get out of this fear place. So let me arrange life circumstances so that everything is stable and consistent. And of course, that's not how life works. And the more we seek outside of us for stability or the circumstances for the cessation of fear, let's say, the more life is just going to continue to confirm these fears, these things that the mind is fixated on. So we have this big T trauma, and it is sort of shrinking the brain, let's say. In the case of body work, understanding that the connective tissue in the body is everywhere. It's like one big spandex suit. It's inside the skull, and compression of it would affect the functioning of the brain. And we can even release that by working on the outside of the skull. And I'm not sure completely the reasoning behind this, but I acknowledge that plenty of spiritual or non-dual teachers will say that no time is needed, that that the answer to this is simply to recognize the mode that is just prior to, just beneath thinking. But I can say that for a year and a half, this seemed a relative impossibility, simply because of a lack of capacity for attention. This can go into potentially ADHD territory. I know that as a child, my report cards came back saying that I couldn't pay attention and that I was hyper, and I would forget what people asked me to do moments after they asked me. And it was a source of a lot of stress, and it only perpetuated itself, so that when people were talking to me, I was anxious. The mind carried on worrying about missing what they were saying, and therefore missing what they were saying. Into adulthood, I'm not sure how this never connected. I don't know how I didn't end up on medication for ADHD, but the fact that I didn't, and the fact that I never got a diagnosis and then ran into multiple medical doctors' work saying that there are no genetic markers for this and that this can be a stress response. This clicked for me so quickly, and in working with the stress response, so I'm talking to somebody, there becomes the awareness that the present moment is being resisted, that the mind is chattering on, and that if the mind weren't chattering on, I would understand, I would hear what they're saying. What I kind of broke that down to was that there was greater importance being placed on the internal chatter than on what was being said outside. The mind has this idea that I need to be thinking something that is going to get me out of this situation. But in fact, the mind's chattering is the situation. So breaking this down really short-circuited the kind of distraction process that was very prevalent in this experience. And part of doing this, and I discuss this in my book, it's one of the exercises, is cultivating curiosity for the present moment, or I think it's called in some ways of thinking the present future. So the kind of future emerging in this moment. And so having a deep curiosity in this, it's almost like saying, I can't wait to know what they're going to say next. Without realizing it, by working around ADHD years ago, in order to better focus on people talking in front of me, it was like a workaround to allow awareness to come to the forefront. It was like the ears went from kind of like a really narrow opening to just wide. It was like I could hear better. It was as though they were speaking inside my head, which in a way is kind of how that's registered. But this workaround of simply being so interested in the present moment actually allow the mind chatter to subside without meditation or some intentional sense of I'm going to sit down and make the mind chatter subside. So I find that in general to be an excellent workaround for the mind chatter that has resulted from big T trauma. Beyond that, the main help that can come in this process of working with this is to refer to yourself early on. There are going to be teachers who have never experienced trauma like you have. They can't. Being enlightened does not mean being all-knowing. Not in the least. Everything they speak about in the relative is from observation, and so if in one's experience there has not been really big sort of mind-altering trauma, that has to be taken with a grain of salt. So refer to yourself. You can take in outside content, of course, but I think there should be a simultaneous goal to get to a place where outside content is no longer needed. And in this, there's a deep love for the self. There's a trust that emerges that says, I'm the one who ultimately is going to show myself to myself. And in that, there's a kind of bridging of the gap between the mind layer and the body layer and the emotional layer, or energetic. This trust forms between the different layers, and the mind gains in power or effectiveness, let's say, so that when we do make an intention, when the mind is used to make an intention, it actually works. There's an actual trust in the mind as an entity. as a tool for us, not as the one that we are, of course. I discuss in my book the idea of taking the indirect path and the direct path at the same time. And for folks with big T trauma, this is who that was meant for. There are a lot of folks who, upon realization of the self, there's the sense of uncertainty that comes in, and with that, the mind senses its opportunity to regain some kind of territory. It sees, okay, if I present these really detrimental thoughts, or if the pain body, the energetic layer of the body presents this pain, emotional pain, physical pain to accompany the emotions, then attention is going to continue to be absorbed in the mental, physical, and energetic. And that's just going to be more time, just a little more time, that I'm the star of the show, and that the wisdom and bliss layers of the body already built into the human experience will still be below detection. So when the mind is presenting these really big thoughts to kind of regain its territory, these so-called seekers are then experiencing so many symptoms, and they're feeling so isolated. This idea of Kundalini syndrome is basically that. It's a strong ego, which in the West it is said that a lot more people experience really dense egos, really dense sets of beliefs that feel like our survival is attached to them, or we will be ostracized if we differ from them. All of this leads to really challenging physical symptoms and intrusive thoughts that make it seemingly impossible to continue. And so there's this massive confusion with folks that's almost like I wish I hadn't realized the self, or I'm ready to be done with this now, I want to go back to being normal. All of this comes from resisting what is. When we surrender to this so-called hellish experience, it immediately opens up. You'll feel what is described as grace descending upon you. And in my case, it's physical. I imagine this is the sensation of bliss that's described, but it's just this, you might call it warm, but it also feels cool. It's just this kind of wave of sensation along with joy, in which these experiences that are being sort of endured may still even be there. They just don't absorb the attention. And all it takes for this is to accept that they're there, accept fully. And it took a good while to understand and to actually embody acceptance, and that's okay. If it takes months or years to learn to accept what is, to physically work through that process, it's okay. Awareness is who you are, is what you are. So-called big T trauma abuse, family values, impending ostracization. None of these things can actually keep you from yourself. And it's perfectly okay that these are experienced in the relative. They don't need to be resisted. Because you are still you, regardless of the relative.